Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now today I want to share with you something special that I've been working on for the past few days. And indeed I want to make a couple of these items in this video. But first, a bit of background information. All of this starts with our D&D group, our D&D troop, if you will, and in particular our Dungeon Master. It is his birthday coming up in the next few days, and as a troop we wanted to make something special, something memorable, and something specifically D&D and linked with our campaigns for him. A special present, a thoughtful present, not just something off the shelf. And there's something that I've been wanting to make for a while, ever since this particular monster turned up in a campaign. You see, we were down in the sewers underneath a temple to Talos, the storm god, and we were trying to figure out why there was a horrible smell rising up into the temple of Talos. And as we sort of came around a corner, we dodged a booby trap, made it safe, and the rest of the troop came through, and suddenly we were set upon, very slowly, by gelatinous cubes. And this was so vivid in my imagination, because each gelatinous cube had in fact consumed an engineer who had previously been sent down to try and fix the sewer, the pipes, the smell. And so the description was that within the gelatinous cubes there were these sort of skeletons suspended, which had been sort of eaten away by the acidic sort of enzymes of the cube, along with a spanner that was nice and shiny, because obviously it had been cleaned completely down to the metal by the cube. And I just thought this was simultaneously scary, hilarious, and a really good monster to fight, because the monster doesn't scream, it doesn't shout, it doesn't cast magic at you, it just sort of, almost like a zombie I suppose, but a really funny zombie, sort of wibbles its way towards you. And this is what I suggested to the D&D troop. I thought, I can make that, I know how to make that out of resin, let me have a crack. And we all sort of pooled our money into a fund, a little budget. It cost about £30 to get the materials, and so I set off with that in mind, and the results so far are quite funky. These gelatinous cubes are made out of resin, and they're using Lego skeletons to represent the poor souls who are trapped inside. So this guy sort of, maybe he's trying to push his way out of the cube, but he hasn't quite managed it, and his skull's been cleaned of all fleshy remnants. And also as well, I put in some of them a little sort of treasure, so there's a yellow jewel in there along with a sword. Now obviously he's not an engineer. We have an engineer here who is also trapped in the cube, and I like the way that he's sort of floating at an angle, and you can see his spanner. And unfortunately, where I spray painted the black spanner silver, the paint has come free in the resin, but I think that's kind of cool. It kind of represents how the cube is acting on the spanner, sort of consuming it bit by bit. So again, I'm quite pleased with that, but I'm also pleased with this one. This is a guy who's sort of fallen into a gelatinous cube and has only been half consumed. So his legs and one peg leg are still there, and the other half of him is a skeleton, which I basically had to sort of chop up a Lego person, or two Lego people I guess, and put him in there. Dangled him above the mold so that the top half was in the resin as it set, and his legs obviously were above the resin, and he is holding a shield, a sword, and there's a little ruby there at the bottom of the cube. And so all of these guys are a little bit different, a bit of a different character in each cube. And I wanted to make a cube for everyone in our troop. There are a total of 6 people, including the DM. And what we're going to do is let him choose his favourite gelatinous cube, and we all get to then pick as well from the bunch. I'm really quite pleased with how these have turned out. And so I want to make a couple more today on video. So let's dive in. So here we are in the living room, and of course I'm joined by my amazing dog, who's here to oversee proceedings, make sure everything is done to the correct standards and safety protocols. He's a diligent stickler for safety, is Indy, and this is the stuff we're going to be using to make our cubes. This is a clear resin casting kit that I bought from eBay. It cost about £15 to get about a kilogram of resin, or what was a kilogram of resin in this bottle. This is the catalyst that comes with the kit, and you need around about 2% catalyst to the volume of resin that you're hoping to form. And it's important that you get the balance right, because too much catalyst will mean that the resin will be very fragile, friable, it'll be likely to sort of crumble or it'll fracture. Basically, it just won't be useful resin. And too little catalyst, I do believe, means that the resin will be sticky, unpleasant to handle. It'll gather dust and grime on it, or it may even just be like a jelly substance, which you don't want. You want a nicely balanced resin that's clear and that's hard and that's going to last, hopefully. As a mold, I'm using this. It's a 4.5 centimeter cubed ice cube mold made out of silicone, and these ice cubes are for whiskey glasses. People put big ice cubes in a whiskey glass, and yeah, I'm using it to make gelatinous cube monsters from D&D. We have a couple of implements for sort of poking and prodding, an old unused chopstick, like a spare chopstick, and some tweezers. This is the stuff that I'm going to be putting into the mold today. We have 2 skeletons left to put in, and some Lego items that I'm willing to sacrifice for the project. We have a glass, and incidentally this was actually a Nutella jar, you can tell by its rounded bottom, which we were willing to sacrifice for the purposes of mixing the resin, and we have of course scales for measuring the volume of resin that we're using. Now, I've already calculated that the volume of a single cube is 91 milliliters. And so today what we're going to be doing is casting half the cube, laying in our skeleton and objects, and then casting the second half of the cube after that. So we need to make, well actually 91 milliliters, because we're casting essentially 1 full cube just divided by 2 cubes. So 91 milliliters is what we're after. So we're going to just move this out of the way for a second and turn our scale on. And it should be set to milliliters. Yes, it is. Excellent. And it's quite straightforward. You take your resin and you pour in 91 milliliters. So here we go. Very careful. 91. Excellent. Ah, 92. Oh, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. In fact, actually, 91 is just shy of the full volume of a cube, so we'll be fine. So 91, no, so 92 rather, milliliters. We need to calculate what 2% of 92 is. I'm going to do that using my phone calculator, and let's see, 92 divided by 100 times 2 equals 1.84 milliliters of the catalyst. This is in here, and what we do is we apply the catalyst using a syringe. 1.84. Okay. Now this, it always makes me feel like I'm a chemist. It's actually quite exciting to sort of, so, you know, when you sort of see someone hold the patient steady, like a doctor or someone who's applying some sort of elixir of life. It lives. So 1.84. So that's 2. So we need to get down to, okay, so that's 1.84 milliliters there. And I was gonna put the lid back on the resin because I'm quite a clumsy soul and I'm liable to spill it. And now comes the mixing. So we put it in there, blow all the air out of the resin. There you go, or out of the syringe, sorry. And this is my mixing stick. So here we go. And it needs to be very, very well mixed. So you cannot really mix this too much, although you don't want to introduce too many air bubbles. To be honest, actually, in my experience so far, and indeed as the instructions say, air bubbles will tend to come out of this mixture fairly readily. So I haven't caught too much in the way of air so far in these molds. But you know, you don't want to be introducing unnecessary air into your casting project. So put that down there, and here we go. So I want to divide this equally between the two, and to that end what I've done is I've actually marked out on the mould the halfway line with the little black dots there, and here we go. Getting there, and just about halfway, and now this side. And almost halfway, not quite. I told you, 91 isn't quite right. These cubes, they market themselves as 4.5 centimeters square, cubed rather, sorry. But in one dimension, I think the Z-axis, it's not quite right. But I haven't, to be honest, I couldn't be bothered calculating two axes of 4.5 and one of 4.7 or something like that. So this is close enough for our work today. There we go. So that's a bit more. That's that done. And now just need to leave it to set, which would take about, well, it's about an hour for it to be sort of tacky. Now what you don't want is to let this set all the way. In today's conditions where it's sort of murky, not too hot in terms of ambient temperature, this resin will take around about 70 minutes, 70 to 90 minutes, maybe an hour and a half to fully go off. But you don't want it to be too close to being fully hard when you put in your items for suspension, because the resin will start to come away from the mould. And when it does come away from the mould and you pour in more resin, the resin goes around the side of the original cast, as it were, or the bottom half, and will form sort of unsightly tendrils and blobs on your mould. So you want this to sort of be tacky, becoming a solid, but not solid quite. So we'll come back in about an hour.
1 hour later.
So it's been actually 55 minutes, that's what I set my timer to. And we're going to turn off this alarm, because it's kind of annoying, and take a look at the casting as it is. Now I've changed the angle of this camera here just so you can get a better look inside, and you'll probably notice that I've added a couple of cheeky inclusions already. About a minute or so after I shut off the cameras, I thought it might be an interesting idea just to put a couple of objects in there. So I put a bone and also a gold cup in there as well. And well, the next stage is to choose how we want the skeletons to appear. Now, skeleton numero uno, I'm going to put this guy in with the gold cup, and I'm just going to sort of drop him, I think. See what happens. Is that? It's not the best. I'll drop it. Try him in a slightly different angle, maybe here. So perhaps actually, maybe he's reaching for the gold cup. Actually, that's what we'll do. We'll put him so that his arms are hopefully sort of in that ish direction. That's good. I like that. I like that. Yeah, and I don't really mind if the gold cup is kind of in the way of his face a little bit in the mould, because that's it adds to a sense of sort of him struggling around inside the gelatinous cube, trying to get at the treasure that he was ultimately doomed to be entombed with. And I don't know, should I put maybe something else from our little plate of possibilities here? It's a wine bottle, but I don't know, a wine bottle. I suppose a wine bottle and a gold cup could work. Maybe there's some sort of cursed wine bottle. Who knows? Okay, cool. Yes, let's try that. So put that in his hand. Oh, that's a good idea. So if we do that, oh, I like that. And the great thing about the Lego skeletons now, the new designs, the latest ones, is that they have fully movable. So the arms rotate in a couple of different directions and also go up and down. So yeah, let's do that. Now, because this resin is a little bit tacky, I have essentially now marked the resin with where the skeleton was lying, but I'm pretty sure I can put him back to approximately where he was. That's good. I like that. I'm just going to slightly push him down as well into the resin, just a touch, because I don't want him to float up to the surface. Hopefully not, anyway. Fingers crossed. Okay, second skeleton. We've plonked a bone in there. This guy, I'm going to sort of twist his legs, maybe. So his legs are sort of like that, a bit more like, oh, what's happening to me? That kind of thing, yeah, like that. And then let's put him a bit more sort of chaotic. So I do want an element of sort of a that sort of floaty, you know, floating element. I don't want them to be too posed in all of these. And I don't know, in his hand, shall we put? Let's put something a bit interesting. Let's put a morning star or whatever, a mace. Let's put a mace in there, shall we? So I'm going to put that in this hand here. And if I can, honestly, it's a little bit fiddly, but it's definitely worth the effort. So there we go. So put him in. Now the good thing as well is that marks made on this sort of tacky substance, as it is at the moment, will they will recede because it's still partly a liquid. It'll start to dissipate the marks that you make. So again, you've got some wiggle room in terms of moving things around. And I think I'm quite happy with that. Now we need to mix up our second batch of resin, and I'm going to go this time actually for a cheeky 95 ml, I think, because well, 92 just about was enough. I want to have a little bit excess. These are the last two skeletons I'm doing for this project, and I don't want to underdo it. So here we go. Now I'm slightly pushing the safety element here in so much as I'm doing this indoors because it's raining outside. But really, this is quite a smelly substance, and I'm gonna have to air out the whole room, certainly before my lovely wife gets home, because this gives her quite a bad headache, which is indicative, I think, of the fact that I probably shouldn't be doing this. Actually, I'll go for 99. Shouldn't be doing this indoors necessarily, and I will open the window as soon as I'm done recording audio. So okay, that's the resin. I've gone for 99 ml. You can't go too small, I think, sometimes, especially when, in this instance, what I want to do is have enough to fill the cubes. And in the case of the guy with the mace, I want the mace to be sort of slightly sticking out of the top of the cube, and so I want as much resin holding as much of that. I don't know what's the protrusion as possible. So 99 divide by 100 times 2 equals 1.98. Of course it does. So 1.98, practically two full mils I want in here. So we get our catalyst once more. There we go. And this time I'm going to do it down here. This should be fairly straightforward. Let's see. Okay. So there we go, that's 2 mils. And now I'm going to put it in. There we go. Again, just sort of pump all the liquid, I suppose, out of there. Don't want any left over. Grab our mixing stick, voila, and stir thoroughly. Now, something else that I haven't mentioned is that these two constituents, they produce an, let me think, is it endothermic reaction? They produce heat. They get warm. Now, because we're using silicon mold that is designed for baking, this stuff is never going to get too warm for the silicon mold that we're using today. But that's just something to be aware of if you're casting something. Particularly if you're making maybe a piece of jewellery where you're suspending something in the mould, be aware of the fact that this resin does heat up. So if it's something that's delicate, maybe it's paper, maybe it's a piece of very thin sort of maybe you know, that sort of I don't know, acetate type plastic. I've seen people maybe do like flower petals and this kind of thing out of that stuff. friends of mine who are crafty, sometimes what they see is actually some sort of heat shrinkage, a warping of those fairly delicate materials because of this endothermic reaction. Anyway, here we go. So the rest of this cube. And voila. And what I'll do is I'll pour in a bit more here before I finish off that first cube. Oh, that's quite a big blob. Now I'm trying to, as I pour, encourage the air, for example, amongst the ribs and underneath the skeletons to move. I'm just doing that by being fairly gentle in how I pour. It's not like I'm adding batter to a mixture. It's much more kind of pointed an operation. There's a slight air bubble in there, but I don't mind. That should come out as this stuff goes hard. And there we go. So that's our second lot of resin in the mould, and it doesn't look as though we've got too much in the way of floating yet. I'm aware that sometimes, for example, the skeletons in particular, their heads, because they have a gap between where the neck and the head sort of sits, like all Lego pieces, sometimes their heads can have a bit of air inside them, and therefore they sort of float to the surface. That's what happened with one of the cubes, and I kind of made it into a feature where his head was kind of half out of the cube. But so far, no obvious floating. So let's see what happens.
2 hours later.
So it's been a couple of hours, and I'm very excited to see how this has turned out. Early signs are good. The mould is nice and clear. The surface is nice and hard. There's not leaving any finger impressions when I tap the mould, and it's no longer hot. It's still warm. I mean, it's going to be a little bit warm, but it's no longer hot. And I suspect what happens when you do this in a 2-layer process, that the second layer and the reaction that's going on in the second layer adds to the heat that's already going on in the first layer, and they kind of speed each other up in that sense. But now comes the moment of truth. It's time to demold these puppies. Now this is never particularly easy, but I am learning to be a bit more forceful with the silicone. It can take it. That's kind of what it's designed to do. But it's got to just basically loosen the edges a little bit, and hopefully it should just pop right out. Oh, here we go. Oh. I've spent my whole life as a fairly large bloke, and my whole life being very careful with everything I touch, not wanting to break things. So it doesn't come easy to me forcing anything. It's kind of ironic, really. Most of the rugby players I've ever known have always been very sort of gentle and gentlemanly. It's usually the spindly football players who are the rough, aggressive ones. There we go. So that's cube number 1. Oh, look at that. So our friend here dove in, or rather, sorry, got caught in this cube while in the middle of a drink, and his cup is there caught in front of his face. I like that. There's the wine bottle. And there's a couple of strange sort of anomalies there, for example, between the hip and the edge of the cube. There's a slight sort of, I suppose, break in the resin. I think that's going to be a combination of air around the skeleton, but also as well this heat element that goes on in the resin casting. I think it tends to sort of cause these slight fractures within. But this is more or less my first time doing this, and I'm quite happy with the look of it. So it works for my purposes, as it were. So that's quite cool. I'm liking the look of this guy. Now I don't want to touch it too much because it's still just a little bit tacky, so I don't want to leave much in the way of obvious fingerprints on there. So I'm going to put this guy down and do number 2. Okay, so here we go. And now that number 1's out, it should be a bit more easy to pop number 2 out. here we go. And, oh, almost there. I feel like I'm sort of, I don't know, like a vet pulling a calf out of a cow. almost there. And there we go. Oh, so the mold is intact. The shape, you know, it's not lost its shape, which is brilliant. I'm gonna have to clean it out before I use it next time. You do get some, you know, a little bit of residue on the edge, on the outside of the mold, but that's all good. I'm happy with that. And here is our cube with the man trapped inside. I like it. There he is. His mace sticking out. He almost got free, but didn't quite manage it. There's a slight air bubble sort of distortion in front of his ribs, but that's okay. And a little bit of air caught around his face. In fact, I think that's happened on this guy as well, on the back of his skull. So a bit of air trapped. But it just, again, it just adds stuff that I think to the look of it. It's not a perfect casting. I couldn't, for example, or rather say, I wouldn't be happy to have a smaller version of this with air in it and use it, say, as a necklace or something, as you sometimes see people on Etsy using resin for making things. Like, well, as I say, some of my friends make jewellery out of resin, capturing little objects. But again, I like the look of this. I think it works, and I think these two are wonderful additions to our Gelatinous Cube Gaggle, Wabble, Waggle, Wobble. Whatever a multitude of cubes, gelatinous cubes, is called, I think these two are good additions to our 6 cubes. Now, there was one thing that occurred to me when I'd finished putting these guys in their mold that I would have liked to have done, and that is actually made use of the perhaps the helmets that I had on the plate here. But actually, in this instance, I didn't want the helmets just to be floating around in the cube necessarily, and I definitely didn't want them to be obscuring the skulls. I didn't want to risk, I kind of like the character and the idea that everything's just been taken off our victim here inside the cube. So I'm happy with that, and this is what I've been up to for the past few days. It's been a successful experiment in the use of resin, and I still have a fair amount of resin left, about a third of my kilogram purchase. So I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, giving it a go. It's much easier than I thought it would be, and these little issues that I've had in terms of the specifics of the mold and the molding process, I'm going to be working out as I go along. This is a learning process, but as far as first tries go, I think these cubes are pretty cool. There's one final thing that I do with these cubes, and that is I'll be going around the upper perimeter and just with a pair of modelling cutters, pliers, just cutting flat the flash. So basically where the meniscus, as it were, of the liquid just slightly rises up on the edge of the mould, on the side and on the corners. Just be cutting this stuff off just around here, and on this one it's on the back here. Cutting that off and finishing them off just so they look a bit more like cubes as opposed to things that have been dropped into a mould, So there we have it, gelatinous cubes using a silicone mould and a good resin casting kit from eBay. I'm really pleased with how these cubes have turned out, broadly speaking. There's a couple of faults I think that I will learn from for future making projects, in particular how the resin forms shapes within the mold itself, or indeed, for example, on the outside of the mold, how even the slightest residue will have an effect on the clarity of the resin. In particular, for example, on this guy, there are just some textures there that I'm choosing to see as part of the character of the mold, but in reality I'd have liked it to have been a little bit smoother. But then again, it would have looked a bit more like ice then, I suppose. It's one of those things where I guess this is part of the beauty of making, I guess, is that there's an element of chance and you've just got to sort of run with it. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I certainly have enjoyed making these things and figuring out how to make them happen, how to make that image pop out of my head and into a real object. It's been fun. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.